Hello, I'm Lisa Francis, and I'm reporting for the NB Media Co-op. And today we are speaking with Minister of Indigenous Services, Mandy Gull-Masty. She's a member of the Cree Nation of Waswanipi in central Quebec, and she's the first ever Indigenous person to serve in the role of Minister of Indigenous Services. Thank you for joining us, Mandy.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Um, so first, can you comment on your significance, on the significance of your role as the first Indigenous person in this role, and briefly, what does it mean to hold this position?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. It's been the greatest pleasure and honor to be named the first Indigenous person to work for all of Indigenous people across Canada. I think it's a time that it's a unique role to be in. I have felt nothing but support and love and, good energy from everybody across the country who have told me on multiple occasions how proud they are of me to take this role on. This kind of role was offered to somebody previously who, for their own reasons decided not to do it. I totally respect that. I chose to take on the mandate and say yes because I truly believe that if we're going to make changes for Indigenous people, it should be, within the context of somebody who knows and understands the reality of what it means to be Indigenous in Canada. So I chose to take on, this role and challenge myself to see what that path could look like. But I have, once again, only ever felt supported by people across the country, and that's really been an honor for me.
Okay, thank you. On the second generation cut up, as you know, senators have passed amendments to Bill S-2 to abolish this rule, which removes Indian status following two generations with a non-status parent.
I chose to champion this amendment because I believe there is nothing more vital to the survival of First Nations than this change. The fact is that we cannot govern who First Nations fall in love with.
And the government's representative in the Senate outlined the government's position. Essentially, he said that the government opposes these amendments to S2, but that the government intends to address these issues later. What's your comments?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. The Bill S2 that was submitted to the Senate, maybe it's not clear what the bill was for. So S2 was actually submitted to the Senate from the government to address enfranchisement. And enfranchisement under the Indian Act refers to individuals that had to give up their status for different reasons. Either could have been because he became a lawyer or a doctor or he bought, property or, in some instances, people gave up their status. And I'm saying gave up because it wasn't always something that they willingly did. So us too was intended to address the 3,500 people who have been faced with enfranchisement, as well as some really derogatory language that's in the Indian Act. And when it was submitted to Senate for them to work on S2, they had decided as part of their work to create an amendment which addresses the second generation cutoff. And second generation cutoff is part of the Indian Act. It is an extremely complex and very discriminatory part of the Indian Act. I want it to be known and understood that I truly support, believe uh, that the Indian Act second generation cutoff is probably one of the most harmful things that we see. And I do also support that we need to have a solution. Um, Maybe people don't always understand that the senatorial process of making a decision is very different than one of a minister. So I have to follow a path that's required of me, which is to ensure that I uphold the duty to consult. Section 35 rights holders have the legal and constitutional duty to be consulted when you make change in the Indian Act. And this is where we had already launched last year a collaborative consultation process. And this process was to ask First Nations communities, what do you believe a solution is to second generation? So we were framing the consultation process with them. How do you want to have that discussion? What do you think this discussion should look like? And then in 2026, launching the formal consultation process to explore how do you remove second generation and what do those potential solutions look like, which then influence what potential legislation options we could create for this. So I think that the Senate, I want to acknowledge that they are doing, good faith work. They want to address a very, very important issue. I, as a minister, also want to address a very important issue. The question is just a procedural technicality. I must uphold the duty to consult. Um, maybe one of the things that I want to share and emphasize is while the Senate has come up with a solution, which is to revert back to a one parent rule, taking the Indian Act back to pre 1985, uh, I think that it's really important that we do the work with community for them to identify and determine who their members are, who are citizens of their nation, because Section 35 of UNDRIP clearly states that this is something that they should be able to do for themselves. I'm trying to respect that as a minister. I know that everybody believes that accepting a solution right away is the best next step. I just have to make sure that the work that I'm doing, I am offering them something that they can apply and work with. A one parent rule is one type of solution, but that could be applied very differently under different governance systems. So it's really important that we do this work and we will continue to, move forward with the process of consultation on looking at those.
Okay, thank you. Um, Critics say that there has been enough consultation on this topic already and that the government is just trying to delay getting rid of second generation cutoff. How would you respond?
I've heard, I've heard a lot of, different commentary around we've done enough consultation. The thing is, you have to frame it within the context of now and today. So you also have to make sure that you are speaking to rights holders under Section 35. So yes, there's been conversations around it. There's been previous discussions. There's been discussions on, should we remove the second generation component of the Indian Act? I just want to clarify that the consultations that we are undertaking is really looking at what are the options or what are the solutions that communities wish to define for themselves in addressing second generation? And that question, I think, is one that we really, really have to explore because a one parent rule could work in some places. In some nations, they could apply different criteria. They could want to look at, recognition by community or, you know, different clauses that really identify how this person is received in community or the preparedness of being able to identify what are the steps that the community takes to receive new members. So I really believe that we have to explore all of those things and create the right solution or response to second generation. Because in this country, governance is different in every nation. There are some treaty nations, there are modern land claims, there are, some self-governing nations in Canada as well. There's some that don't have treaty and they're unceded territories. So trying to take one solution, like a one parent rule, and apply it across the country could potentially be very challenging and create some unintended consequences. And I really believe, because I'm also a former leader, I'm not just a minister, first and foremost, upholding that duty to consult and providing communities the opportunity to frame how they want to respond to second generation cutoff at a community level is what is going to create the best solution for them, by them.
So that would look more like using Section 10.
I think that is part of the discussion as well, because we know that, Section 10 membership thresholds are very high. And when you have members that are living off community, or when you have members that are not participating in decision making processes, it can really hold community in one position. So we want to be sure that we are looking at What does it mean to recognize your members? What are the regulations surrounding that and the decision making process? How do you now receive or address your community members that are on community, that are off community, that are, potentially realizing and connecting to their new heritage as an Indigenous person, as a First Nations person. I believe that it is a very complex, multifaceted solution that has to be created. And ultimately, I want to be respectful of First Nation communities. And I believe that when you're looking for a solution, it's not government's place to apply one. It's government's place to create that space and work with them to determine what that is and help them implement it.
Mhm. So no one size fits all, eh?
I think we've seen it in the past and there's been a lot of challenge
Mhm.
with it. So I don't think that this has been the best example of success. So I'm looking to create new ones.
Mm, I like that. Can you tell us more about the collaborative process that you mentioned? The process is supposed to end in December. What do you expect that will be the outcome, and when will we see the results?
Sure. Thank you for that additional question. The collaborative process was launched. We have almost 90 groups that participated. We've heard back from many of them. In total, we have received so far up to date 76 different briefings from various groups, including some from New Brunswick, that just frame this is what we think the conversation should look like. Here are the different components of second generation that we believe impact us. And here is how we would like this process to unfold. Here are the needs that we have to be able to participate in that process. And here's what we think, an outcome should look like for us. So everybody across the country have submitted these types of briefs. They've given even like historical background. They have pressed the urgency in all of their briefs of why we need to change this. It's very clear to me that we need to prepare a solution for this. But it's also very clear to me in reading and reviewing these briefs, they all have a different frame from which they're speaking from. And they all have some commonality in saying we need to find a solution for second generation, but they also have their own unique needs and components and how they want to have the conversation.
Mhm. So, briefly, can we talk about the federal budget?
Sure, of course.
Okay. The budget says your department will find savings of 2%. But as you know, a lot of people have been concerned about programs related to Jordan's principle getting cut off and just not enough resources for people in First Nations in general. How do you plan to address the Jordan principles issue?
When we did the budget exercise, we were one of the departments that was actually asked to explore what a 15% reduction would look like. We did that exercise. We did the evaluation. We were alarmed with what the outcome looked like. We took it to the Prime Minister. We took it to the Minister of Finance. They made the decision that they would have a reduction and that we would stay within a 2% space. I'm confident in that decision because we know that there are some duplications and inefficiencies in programming that we've had previously. We are trying to streamline, we're trying to modernize, but we're trying to make sure that the programs and services that we have are hitting the targets that they're intended for. So we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that in the next step moving forward, we're able to address those outcomes. It's one of the things that the Prime Minister asked me to identify what is outcomes that communities are looking for in terms of the programs and services they receive. This is more work that we're going to do. I think it's really critical we do that work with communities. So, looking to do that enhanced engagement. In terms of some things that you see in the budget, I think there was a lot of confusion when a very particular chart full of zeros was circulated on social media. I think people interpreted that as that was the 2% cut. In fact, that is not what the 2% is. That chart just refers to we need to identify the outcomes that we're looking for so that we can determine what that funding is going to look like in the future. So it's really important that we do that work with community to identify what does a good quality outcome look for, what look like for your community, what is your hope for, the future space and vision of how you want your community to look. That is what's going to identify what those zeros turn into in the future. And one last part, the last part of your question refers to Jordan's principle. Jordan's principle is not a program or service, it's a legal responsibility that we have to respond to. These there's still funding identified for this year. Jordan's principle is a decision that really upholds the need to ensure that we are closing the gap between provincial and federal jurisdiction in delivery of health services. And we're looking to create some change to Jordan's principle in collaboration with community, in collaboration with users of Jordan's principle, in collaboration with those individuals who implement Jordan's principle funding, because there were some previous decisions in operational bulletin that made changes to Jordan's principle, but they were kind of taken in a context where there was not a lot of, I guess I'm gonna say it was a high level decision that maybe there wasn't the understanding or realization that some of those decisions really had a huge impact on how the Jordan's principle worked. So we really want to address those issues, and we believe that in doing that work with community, we can identify a good process to respond to the people that need to use Jordan's principle. And it is clear that there is a need for Jordan's principle, and we are going to respect and uphold what duty we have in this space.
Hey, thank you. And finally, um, any comments on the news of the resignation of Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, Stephen Guilbeault?
I have had the opportunity to work with Stephen Gilbo. I received this news just very shortly before this interview. I'm not going to comment at this time. I really want to respect the space that he's in, and that was tough news to hear.
Really, thank you. I've been speaking with Mandy Gull-Masty, Minister of Indigenous Services. She's the first ever Indigenous person in that role. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the time.